Resume. Right. So peripheral nervous system we were talking about. Yeah. So anything other than brain and spinal cord is peripheral nervous system. So which means like all the sensation or all the stimulus we create at the tip of the finger, we go along the sensory nerve fibers, go to the spinal cord. They might go to the brain, or they might just at the spinal cord level come back and then provide appropriate motor response to the stimulus. So these pathway is called peripheral nervous system. Of course, when we start a stimulus like a temperature or touch, then we need to have a receptor on our skin. That receptor, we pick up the stimulus, and then that stimulus will be generated as the action potential and go along the sensory pathway to the central nervous system. And from the central nervous system, the motor pathway will come back and react as appropriate, depending on whether it is a pleasant or unpleasant uh, situation. So that's a peripheral nervous system. And we talk a lot about uh, the viscer the receptors, different types of receptors. Like we have, like to make it short, we have only like two, we can classify two ways for the receptors, like depending on their location, like if they are exposed to the environment, like our skin receptors, they will be called exteroceptors. And if it is coming from the heart or the stomach, they will be called interoreceptors. And number three receptor is the joint position sense, like your joint being stretched or being flexed. So that's the way we detect, and our brain knows these receptors are located in the joint and tendons, and they are called proprioceptors. So there are three types of receptors according to the location, and according to the stimulus they accept, they detect. We have temperature receptor, which is called thermoreceptors, pressure, like being pressed, or mechanoreceptor, chemoreceptor, which detect the chemical changes like hydrogen ion, pH, photoreceptors, which is like retinas in receptors in the retina. These are photoreceptors. They accept the light, and the nociceptors, which is new, which accept the nuisance sensation. So there are two main ways to classify the receptors, depending on their location or depending on the stimuli they detect. So yes, if we look at this diagram, there are many different receptors. There are many different receptors, and that's in the skin. So these receptors will be called mechano exteroreceptors. So yes, it is not that important, but I want you to have a look so that you know, like you can appreciate the different receptors in different part of the body, and which receptor is taking the stimulus, detecting the stimulus. So it is interesting. As an anatomy student, I want you to know the name, like a massa spindle receptors, like tendon organs, be not important for the exam, but I think you might have to know this when you go to the nursing or when you go to the physical therapy training. So these receptors will become important, which is massa spindle receptors. That from the receptor, it will come along with the nerve, which is called peripheral nerve. So the nerve we know, like sciatic nerve, radial nerve, ulnar nerve, these are structurally, these are made of this. Basically, it's axon being covered with the myelin sheath, which is again covered with the endoneurium. Multiple endoneurium packed axons packed together with the perineurium, and then this perineurium bench will be packed with the epineurium. So this group is called the nerve fibers, like radial nerve, ulnar nerve, sciatic nerve, the nerve you see day to day. So, and cranial nerves, yes, a little bit, what shall I say, important, but just pick up the important peculiar points. I don't want you to go through everything in detail, which will make it confusing and which will be, it's not productive, like olfactory, smell, optic, vision, oculomotor, movement of the eye, trochlea is just for motor, movement of the eye, trigeminal, I want you to know three trigeminal. Fifth cranial nerve is called trigeminal because it has three main branches, which will go to the forehead, frontal, which will go to the maxilla on the cheek, maxillary, and which will go along the mandibular branch. So that's why this fifth cranial nerve is called trigeminal nerve, which is a really big one. Trigeminal nerve is for sensation of the face because it is going to the forehead, the maxilla, and the mandible. So therefore, if you touch your face, then the skin sensation will be taken by the trigeminal nerve. Abducens nerve is like 3, 4, 6 cranial nerve as a movement of the eye. So eye movement is carried out by the third cranial nerve, fourth cranial nerve, and sixth cranial nerve. Facial nerve is for movement of the facial muscle. So when you smile, when you cry, when you laugh, these muscle activities, they are conducted by the facial nerve. So facial nerve, we supply the facial muscles for the movement of the facial expression. So does facial nerve has got sensory component? Yes, it has. It is for the here visceral sensation. So from the tongue, taste sensation will be also carried by the facial nerve. Vestibulocochlear, cochlea and vestibule for hearing and equilibrium. So it is mainly sensory. Somatic, so glossopharyngeal, glosso means tongue, pharyngeal means our pharynx. Glossopharyngeal means like our tongue and the pharynx, like swallowing. So they will have generated sensation from the tongue as well as movement of the tongue or pharynx. Vagus nerve, vagus means wandering, long and windy nerve, which is going to everywhere, like from heart, lungs, gastrointestinal tract, down to the colon. So vagus nerve is wandering. It will be important for the movement of the gastrointestinal tract. It will be important for the movement and heart rate of the rate of the heart. It will control the heart rate. And accessory nerve is purely motor. Look at that, purely motor. Like when you shrug your shoulder, that's trapezius. This trapezius is supplied by the spinal accessory nerve. So whenever you say, hey, then you are using your accessory nerve and you're giving stimulus from the spinal accessory nerve and stimulating the trapezius, like you are shrugging your shoulder. And hypoglossal nerve, hypoglossal meaning it is the tongue muscle for the tongue. So it is purely motor if you look at it. So if you stick out your tongue, when you stick out your tongue, then that is the action of the glossopharyngeal nerve. So let's say if somebody who has got injury to the hypoglossal nerve, when they stick out their tongue, let's say if the right side of the hypoglossal nerve is damaged, then the left side of the hypoglossal nerve is still intact, and therefore left side of the tongue will come forward, but the right side of the tongue, because of the damage now, it cannot come out. Then the tongue will deviate to the affected side. So because right hypoglossal nerve is damaged, right side of the tongue cannot come out, left hypoglossal nerve is still intact, left hypoglossal nerve can push the tongue out. So the tongue will not come straight like that. The tongue will deviate to the damaged side. So that's the hypoglossal nerve. So don't go too far too deep. Just pick up these little things and then just move on. So these are the nerves originating from the brainstem. Brainstem, we have from 3rd to 12th cranial nerve. And as we know, the spinal accessory, which is the 11th cranial nerve, look at that. It is originating from the lower part of the brainstem, which is medulla oblongata, which is color with the green color. And its fiber also originates from the upper portion of the spinal cord. Look at that. These little nerve rootlets come out from the brainstem and the spinal cord and finally form to become the spinal accessory nerve. So it came out from the foramen magnum and it has to go back into the cranium and it has to come back out again. Therefore, this spinal accessory nerve is a little bit, what shall I say, it's unusual, I would say, come out from the foramen magnum, go back into the brain, and then come back out again. So, and if you look at the size of the trigeminal nerve, right, it's really, really big. And therefore, it can give 3 main branches, like frontal, maxillary, and mandibular nerve. So again, like pons, if you look at pons, mid-pons here, the pons and the midbrain and pons junction, we have the 3rd cranial nerve, oculomotor nerve here, more in the center, trochlear nerve, which is more on the lateral. 5th cranial nerve is mainly in the pons, and the rest, they will go back again to the junction of the pons and medulla oblongata. So yes, just a rough idea so that you can appreciate the different location of the origin of the different cranial nerves. And what is important is just pick up a little peculiar points. If you try to swallow everything, you will forget. Therefore, just pick up a few little important points from the cranial nerve. And this is the spinal reflex, and this is the cortical pathway. So spinal reflex, I believe you know that. And this is the spinal cord. Yeah, this is the spinal cord. Or the spinal nerve come out from the spinal cord. As we know, we have 8 pairs of cervical nerve roots, but we only have 7 cervical vertebrae. We have 12 thoracic vertebrae, and we have 12 thoracic 12 pairs of thoracic spinal nerve root, and we have 5 lumbar vertebrae, and we have the 5 lumbar nerve roots, 5 pairs of lumbar nerve root, right and left come out, and then we get 5 sacral vertebrae, and we have the 5 pairs of sacral nerve roots come out. So that is a little bit, little bit peculiar point, the inequality of the vertebral bodies and the spinal nerve roots. So yes, we have seen this already, and yes, until like cervical 7 nerve root will come above the cervical 7 pedicle or vertebral body, but because cervical has 1 extra nerve root, it has to come below the cervical 7 vertebrae and pedicle, and since then everything come out below the body or the pedicle. Yeah, so from T1, right? We have spinal nerve here, 31 pairs, but we have different arrangement for the vertebral bodies. And we were talking about this spinal cord, which is inside the spinal canal. And motor, here we can see the H-shaped gray matter. These are called anterior horn, and these are called posterior horns. So motor come out from the anterior horn, and sensory will go into the posterior horn. Yeah. So sensory will go into the posterior horn, and the motor will come out from the anterior horn. Combination of sensory and motor, anterior and posterior roots, it is called the spinal nerve. And spinal nerve just quickly split into two, one for the back, which is the dorsal ramus, and one from the front, which is called the ventral ramus. Yes, so here we can see dorsal ramus and ventral ramus. So this is the spinal nerve. This is the posterior rim. This is the posterior, and this is the anterior rami, and this is the ramus, posterior ramus, anterior ramus. So look at that. The posterior ramus will supply the muscles and the skin on the back near our spine. Look at that. Look at that. And ventral ramus, we will be talking about ventral ramus. These ventral ramus, we go on their own, or we divide and split and combine, and then we form the peripheral nerves. So this is the spinal cord, anterior rootlets, and the ventral root, anterior root, posterior root, finally divide into multiple rootlets and go into the posterior horn. For the sensory, motor come out from the anterior. Combination of anterior root and posterior root is called spinal nerve. And spinal nerve, we just, once it's combined, and then once it's, after that, immediately it has to split into ventral ramus, and look at that, ventral ramus and dorsal ramus. So which means, if we look at the spinal nerve, the portion we call spinal nerve is very, very short, because it was a dorsal root or posterior root, and it has the ventral root or anterior root. They bind to form a spinal nerve, and with spinal nerve with very small millimeter, and then it has to split again into dorsal ramus and ventral ramus. And spinal cord is covered with the, like a brain, the dura mater, arachnoid mater, and parameter. Parameter is very much close to the spinal cord substance. Arachnoid mater and the parameter, there are blood vessels here, and the outermost layer is dura mater. Yeah. So, and if we are critical, and if we look at the posterior horn and anterior horn, dorsal horn and ventral horn, or anterior, posterior horn and anterior horn, the arrangement of the sensory neurons coming in are very different. Although the sensory come into the dorsal root, somatic sensation is very much posterior, and visceral sensation is more anterior to the somatic sensation. The same thing like in the anterior horn, very, very anterior is somatic motor. Visceral motor is slightly located on the lateral side. So these are the origins of the new motor neurons for the visceral motor, and motor neurons for the somatic motor. So this is a little bit important, so that we can appreciate, if there is damage to this area, only the somatic sensation will damage, but visceral sensation might be intact. The same thing, like if we damage the very anterior portion of the anterior horn, then we will only damage the somatic motor. Ventral motor will stay be intact. So, and as we know, like dorsal roots and ventral roots join to form the spinal nerve, and then finally spinal nerve quickly split into dorsal ramus and ventral ramus. And some of the fibers come and connect to the sympathetic chain. Sympathetic chain is the part of the autonomic nervous system. Sympathetic chain is located on either side of the vertebra. Yeah, either side of the vertebra. Sympathetic trunk, sympathetic chain, the same. Yeah, it has got like little beads like structures, which is called sympathetic ganglia. What is a ganglia? Ganglia is the collection. Ganglia is a collection of the neurons. Yeah, ganglia means it's a collection of the neurons. So our anterior ramus, we go to the ganglia and we leave the ganglia and then come back here again, and then they will go. So the way this book has expressed is really, really nice. You know, the sum of some fibers we come, and from the anterior ramus we come to the ganglia. There is a synapse. Synapse means connection of the two neurons. So the first neurons, which the neurons start from here, the axon run here. This is the axon running like that and coming into the ganglia, and it's end here. The second order neuron, which is taking the sensation in the synapse. Synapse means connection of two neurons, the ending of the first neuron and the beginning of the second neuron, which is leaving here, taking the information as a relay center. And these are located in the ganglia. Of course, ganglia, we have lots of neurons. So these are the neurons. This is the ending of the one axon. And then they will leave here like that. So, it is just like loop around and then go again. Like, okay, some of the fibers, we come here, but they will not do the synapse at the same level. They might go one level or two level up, or they might go one level or two level down, and then they will do the synapse. Synapse is the connection of the ending of one neuron and the beginning of the second neuron here. Look at that, another neuron. So this is the cell body of the neuron, and this is the axon leaving the synapse again. So yes, some might not even do the synapse in the sympathetic ganglion. They will just go close to the target organ, and there will be a synapse, which is the plexus. That is what we call plexus. Plexus means it is like a ganglion, but it is more widespread. Ganglion is like a localized area. Plexus, nerve plexus mean like multiple connection and junction before they go to the target organ. Spinal cord, yes, this is the diagram which is showing the disc, intervertebral disc compressing on the spinal nerve root. And that's the way we structure our spine. If we look at that, we have vertebral bodies here, the blocks, and at the front of the vertebral bodies, we have the anterior longitudinal ligament. Where is it? Anterior longitudinal ligament here. Look at that, anterior longitudinal ligament. At the back of the vertebral body, we have the posterior longitudinal ligament. So these are running along the spine, which keeps the spine in one on top of another. On top of that, we will have in the spinous processes, we have this supraspinous ligament, intraspinous ligament, and ligamentum flavum. Look at the ligamentum flavum, interspinous ligament. So all the ligaments here connecting the spine. In between the spine, connecting each spine is called interspinous ligament. The ligament running on top of the spine is called supraspinous ligament. So these are the multiple ligaments, multiple anterior longitudinal and posterior longitudinal. So all these ligaments fix the spine together to keep it mobile and at the same time to give the stability of the spine. So again, like don't forget the layers covering the layers covering the spinal cord, which is the same as layers covering the brain, which is DAP, dura mater, arachnoid mater, and pia mater. And this is a little bit more closer, and you can see the intervertebral disc, intervertebral, so in between the vertebral body, intervertebral disc, which is also, keeping the spine in, giving the spine some sort of stability. And look at that, that's the way our spinal nerve roots come out from the spinal canal. Look at that, lumbar 5 vertebrae and the lumbar 1 vertebrae and lumbar 1 nerve root come out just below the pedicle. Yeah, look at that, that's below the pedicle. Nerve plexus, hey, now we start, we are in business now. This is the beginning of today's lecture. Nerve plexus. What do we mean by nerve plexus? Of course, it is just like, like a junction, motorway junction, like all the nerve fibers or all the motorways come in one place and they will mix and mesh, and then they will leave and they will go to everywhere they want to go. So the same thing, all the nerve fibers come in together, mix and mesh, join and divide, and finally leave the plexus as single particular nerve. That is what we call a nerve plexus. So these nerve plexus are formed by the ventral rami. So ventral ramus, which we saw, they are not formed by the dorsal ramus. So what do I mean by ventral ramus? Ventral ramus means like only these ventral ramus will form the nerve plexuses. These small little dorsal ramus will go to the back of the body and will supply the muscles of the back and sensation of the skin on the back. So these dorsal ramus will not involve in the nerve plexus formation. Only the ventral ramus will involve in the nerve plexus formation. So ventral ramus of all the spinal nerve, except thoracic 2 to thoracic 12. What's happening to these thoracic 2 to thoracic 12? Why don't they get involved for the nerve plexuses? Because these thoracic 2 to thoracic 12, they will go underneath the rib as the intercostal nerve. And therefore, thoracic 2 to thoracic 12 spinal nerve, they will not form a nerve plexus. They will just individually run underneath the ribs to give the intercostal nerve. So from the somatic motor portion, so somatic motor means which is the anterior horn, very anterior. You saw that. Anterior horn, very anterior, that's the somatic motor portion. The neurons originate from this area, and then they will come along the ventral root, and then they will form the spinal nerve, and then they will split into anterior ramus. The anterior ramus of the nerve fibers originating from the somatic motor region, they will give us the cervical plexus, brachial plexus, lumbar plexus, sacral plexus. So from the visceral motor, which is a little bit more lateral, if you remember that diagram, visceral motor will give nerve fibers from the visceral motor will give the cilious plexus, like autonomic nervous system plexuses. And so nerve plexus, as we say, is a ventral rami, which will converge to form plexuses, multiple nerve fibers, and then they will finally diverge as the individual nerve. So cervical plexus for the neck and head, brachial plexus for the arm, lumbar plexus for the lumbosacral region, and sacral plexus for the sacrum and the lower limb. So the ventral rami of the cervical nerve roots will form the cervical plexus. So we need to go and study this. So let's look at the cervical plexus. Cervical plexus is formed by the nerve roots from the cervical 1 to cervical 5. Of course, they will be from the somatic motor region, and they will be from the anterior ramus. Yeah, if you remember that diagram. So 1 to 5. Where are they located? They are located deep to the sternocleidomastoid. So how can you see your own sternocleidomastoid? So if you look inside the mirror, if you push your chin with your hand and your chin against the hand, so push yourself like that, you are pushing the right side and your right hand is pushing against your chin. If you do that, you will be able to feel your sternocleidomastoid. So and just underneath the sternocleidomastoid, which is here, and now we can see the cervical plexus. So where is it? So we learned from the previous lecture, like in the neck, we divide the neck region into anterior triangle and posterior triangle. Look at that. The cervical plexus is in the posterior triangle of the neck. What are the boundaries of the posterior triangle of the neck? Anteriorly, there will be posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid. And posteriorly, there will be anterior margin of the trapezius. And here in the bottom, we have the middle 1/3 of the clavicle. That is what we call the posterior triangle of the neck. I believe you remember that. Muscles of the head and neck, that's the posterior triangle of the neck. And we said posterior triangle of the neck is important. If you are exploring the posterior triangle of the neck, you got to be cautious because you have the cervical nerve plexus is in the posterior triangle of the neck. And on top of that, we can see the external jugular vein here. We can see the subclavian artery here. So that's why posterior triangle of the neck is important. And now when we are exploring the posterior triangle of the neck, and we are seeing the cervical nerve plexus. You can see cervical plexus. Cervical plexus start from the cervical 1. Look at that. It is originating above coming out from the spinal cord, above the pedicle of the cervical 1 vertebra. Look at the vertebra and pedicle. Cervical 2 coming out here, cervical 3, cervical 4, cervical 5. They are running above. They are running above the pedicles of their own vertebra, and they will merge together. Look at that, cervical 1, cervical 2, cervical 3. They will mix and match, and finally nerve fibers come out. So, do you need to know all the nerve fibers coming out from the cervical plexus? I don't think so. Yes, it's good to know, but I don't think I can remember everything. So therefore, we have to be smart and we have to be tactical. So what we need to remember from the cervical plexus, so what we need to remember from the cervical plexus is, number 1, the phrenic nerve. Look at that phrenic nerve. Phrenic nerve is originating from the cervical 3, cervical 4, cervical 5. They all march together in cervical plexus, and then finally one big nerve came out, which is what we call phrenic nerve. What does it do, this phrenic nerve? Phrenic nerve is to drive our diaphragm, which is the partition between the thorax and the abdomen. Is this diaphragm important? Of course, it is the one of the structures for inspiration, isn't it? When the diaphragm contract, the diaphragm got flattened, increased the vertical diameter of the thorax, and that can create the negative intrathoracic pressure. And because of that, we can take a breath in. So therefore, phrenic nerve is important. Phrenic nerve originates from the cervical plexus. To be more precise, cervical plexus, cervical 3, 4, 5. So the way we try to remember is C3, 4, 5, keep the diaphragm alive. C3, 4, 5, cervical 3, 4, 5, keep the diaphragm alive. We keep our diaphragm through the phrenic nerve from the cervical 3, 4, 5. So cervical 3, 4, 5 is really, really important. Phrenic nerve is really, really important. It is just one of the reasons we are still alive because of this intact phrenic nerve. If we do not have phrenic nerve, we will need a ventilator because our diaphragm is not working anymore. So C3, 4, 5, keep the diaphragm alive. So that's why the cervical plexus is important, because it gives us the phrenic nerve. And there are a few other little nerves, I mean, not because they are less important, but they are just more, lesser occipital. Lesser occipital means it's going to the back of the occiput for the sensation. Greater auricular nerve, transverse cervical, ansa cervicalis. Hey, look at that ansa cervicalis. Ansa cervicalis is for the muscle, platysma muscle. The muscle, we saw that during the head and neck muscle, like when you do this, and then you can see the platysma muscle. That platysma muscle is supplied by the ansa cervicalis. And now you can see the accessory nerve, which is coming down here. There will be contribution from the upper cervical nerve roots as well. So if you forget anything, that's fine. I want you to take phrenic nerve originate from the cervical plexus. To be more precise, it is cervical 3, 4, 5, which we makes the phrenic nerve. And phrenic nerve, we drive our diaphragm so that we can take a breath in. So that is the importance of the phrenic nerve and importance of the cervical plexus. Of course, if we want to go more detail, then yes, we can go deeper and deeper. It is just for the this is just for the completeness. So ansa cervicalis, infrahyoid muscle of the neck, omohyoid, sternohyoid, sternothyroid. So phrenic nerve, diaphragm. So I want you to take phrenic nerve, which is the cervical 3, 4, 5, which is coming from the cervical plexus. So brachial plexus. Brachial plexus means the name is telling us brachial, so it should be going to the arm. Brachial plexus is important in many different ways. I have to read again and again. Like I have been reading from the medical student, and I'm still reading about this brachial plexus, because it is like if you do not talk about this brachial plexus in a few weeks' time, you will forget. Doesn't matter when you have to face it, you read it again. So just keep reading about brachial plexus. I think that's the only way to remember. Even then, we will not remember at any point. So when it comes to exam, just study for the brachial plexus. Yes, and then you forget about it, come back again, do it. So this brachial plexus is important. Brachial plexus is formed by the lower cervical vertebrae, lower cervical spinal nerve roots, because upper 5 cervical nerve roots we have been involved in the cervical plexus. So lower 5 cervical nerve plus upper thoracic one. So first thoracic vertebra, they join together to form the brachial plexus. So from C5, C6, C7, C8, and thoracic one. So these 5 nerve roots, of course, they are anterior ramus, not the posterior ramus. Posterior ramus we go to the back of the neck. Anterior ramus we form together to form the brachial plexus combination. And like, so brachial plexus is important, we have to remember the roots origin, where are they, and then they will join together. So before they join, they are called roots, and then once they join, they are called trunk, and then finally they divide again, that is called division, and finally they will merge again, which is called cord, and finally they will become individual nerve, which is called the branches. So the way we try to remember is Robert Taylor drinks cold beer. Robert Taylor drinks cold beer. Root, trunk, division, cord, beer, branches. And these are the locations: scalene muscle, middle third of the clavicle, axillary, artery, and in the upper limb. So this, we will understand this is slightly later. Let's have a look. So this is the brachial plexus. As we know, brachial plexus originated from the anterior rami of the cervical 5, cervical 6, cervical 7, cervical 8, and thoracic 1 anterior rami. We form the cervical brachial plexus. This C4, it is not routine or not, not always contribute to the brachial plexus. So if we need to, we can forget about cervical 4 nerve root. But what we need to take is C5, C6, C7, C8, T1. These five nerve roots, anterior rami, will be merging together to form the brachial plexus. If you look at that, if you look at that carefully, hey, don't look anywhere. Look at the diagram. Look at the diagram here. Look at this, the blue, which is the roots. So C5 root, C6 root, C7 root, C8 root, and CT1 root. They will be joining together now. How do they join? Look at that. The C5 and C6, they will join together to become like a red-orange color. C7 doesn't join anything, and on its own, that is what orange color. The C8 and T1 will join together to become orange color. So that's why we say, hey, this is root. And because of the combination of root is called trunk. So this is what we call upper trunk. This is what we call middle trunk. And this is what we call lower trunk. Look at that. Upper, middle, and lower trunks. Because roots of the C5, roots of the C6 to form the upper trunk. C7 does not join anything, which on its own contribute to the middle trunk. And C8 and T1 join together to form the lower trunk. So this lower trunk, and finally we divide again. Look at that. This orange will divide into green and yellow. This will divide into green and yellow. And this upper trunk will divide again into green and yellow. Look at that. So now we call this yellow cord, C-O-R-D, cord. So depending on their location, because we will have a axillary artery here, somewhere around here in the, so on the lateral side of the axillary artery is called lateral cord. Posterior to the axillary artery, this green color is called posterior cord. And the medial to the axillary artery is called medial cord. So now we have got roots, and then finally trunk. 5 roots form 3 trunk, and 3 trunk we divide anterior and posterior. This is what we call divisions. So the yellows are the anterior division, the greens are the posterior divisions. And now the divisions we merge together to form the cord. And now the cord we split again or merge again to form the branches, which is what we call the nerve. So radial nerve, median nerve, and ulnar nerve. So that is the brachial plexus. So if you can remember this, then I want you to tally with this diagram. So the roots are here inside, trunk are here, and if we look at the clavicle, clavicle is close to the division here, and the cords will be is related to the axillary artery, and branches, they are everywhere. That was what I was talking about here. The roots will be covered with the scaling muscle. The trunk will still be covered with the scaling muscle. Division in the middle part of the clavicle, the cord around the axillary artery, and branches are going into the upper extremity. So the roots and the roots here, and then trunk here, so they will be in close relation to the scaling muscle. And the division here, look at the division here, will be related to the middle part of the clavicle. And finally, the division will merge together to form the cord, which is related to the axillary artery, which is somewhere around here. And finally, they will divide and split to form the branches, which will enter the upper extremity. So yes, Robert, roots, Taylor, trunk, drinks, division, core, cords, beer, branches. So that's why we try to remember as Robert Taylor drinks core beer. So yes, look at that relationship of the brachial plexus from its root to the branches. So its roots C5 to T1. Look at that. Where is it? Here, scaling muscle, here, scaling muscle. So the root and the division is related, closely related to the scaling muscle. Division, anterior and posterior divisions are related to just underneath the middle part of the clavicle, and lateral cord, medial cord, and posterior cord is in relationship with the axillary artery, and finally they will just branch to form the nerve, axillary nerve, radial nerve, median nerve. So that is the relationship and proximity of the brachial plexus to the surrounding structure. Okay, so now we have seen this diagram already. We have seen this, so I hope we will be able to appreciate a little bit more about the brachial plexus. So what is happening here? So roots, Robert Taylor drinks cold beer. So roots, C5, 6, 7, 8, T1. Yeah, these are the roots. C5 and 6 will bind to form the upper trunk. C7 on its own to form the middle trunk. C8 and T1 to form the lower trunk. And this trunk will divide into anterior division, posterior division, anterior division, posterior division, anterior division, posterior division. Look at that, all the posterior divisions will form the posterior cord. Yeah, posterior divisions will form the posterior cord. And the upper 2 anterior divisions will become the lateral cord, and lower anterior division will become the medial cord. And we know that why do we call medial, lateral, or posterior? Because they are medial to the axillary artery, lateral to the axillary artery, and posterior to the axillary artery. And these are the important nerves coming out from the different cords: lateral cord, medial cord, and posterior. So from the posterior cord, we have radial nerve and axillary nerve come out. From the lateral cord, we have this musculocutaneous nerve, and a branch from the lateral cord and a branch from the medial cord, we merge together to form the medial nerve. Of course, there are many other nerves originating from the medial cord, lateral cord, and posterior cord, but these are the some important nerves originating from the brachial plexus. So now I hope you remember roots, trunk, division, cord, and the branches, and why they are relationship. Roots are related to the scaling muscle. Trunks are related to the scaling muscle. Divisions are related to the middle third of the clavicle. Cords are related to the axillary artery, and branches are in the extremity. And upper and C5 and 6 we form upper, C7 on its own become middle, C8 and T1 become lower. All the three trunks we divide into anterior and posterior, anterior and posterior, anterior and posterior. All posterior we join together to form the posterior cord. Upper to anterior we form the lateral cord, and lower anterior we on its own we become the lateral cord. Why do we call medial lateral? Because of their relation to the axillary artery. And finally, these lateral, medial, and posterior cords we give branches into the arm, which are called radial, ulnar, axillary, and so on and on and on. And medial nerve is a little bit peculiar because it receives a branch from the lateral cord and a branch from the medial cord, and finally become medial nerve. So this brachial plexus anatomy, I want you to try to understand. I want you to draw down, a diagram, so that only then that will come in your mind. Otherwise, if you just look, it will be just on the paper. So now let's move on to the next slide. Again, it is the same thing. C5 and 6 combine. Root become trunk. C7 on its own, trunk. C8 and T1 join the trunk. And finally, divide into anterior and posterior, anterior and posterior, anterior and posterior. All the posterior, we form the posterior cord. Upper to anterior, we form the lateral cord, and middle anterior, we continue on its own. And medial nerve is the combination of the medial, a branch from the medial, and a branch from the lateral. Yes, so this is another view. So how can we remember the different nerves coming out from the different cord, like lateral cord, medial cord, posterior cord? Hey, this is the way we try to remember the different nerve originating from the different cords. From the lateral cord arise the love me Lily. Hey, love me Lily. Love me Lily. What is that? Love means lateral pectoral nerve. Me means lateral cutaneous branch of the median nerve. Lily, musculocutaneous nerve. So median nerve, me means musculocutaneous nerve. Lateral pectoral, lateral branch to the median nerve, which is what we are talking about here. Here, this is what we lateral portion for the median nerve, lateral head of the median nerve. So lateral pectoral nerve, lateral head of the median nerve, and musculocutaneous nerve. So from the lateral cord, which is the mnemonic is love me Lily. Posterior cord is easy to remember, star, S-T-A-R. So we will have subscapular nerve, thoracodorsal nerve, axillary nerve, and radial nerve. Subscapular nerve, thoracodorsal nerve, axillary nerve, and radial nerve. That comes from the posterior cord. So from the posterior cord, you will have star. Yeah, from the posterior cord, you will have star. From the lateral cord, you will have love me lily. And from the medial cord, we have to remember as you may marry me, Mary. So you mean honor, may mean medial pectoral. So from the lateral cord, we have lateral pectoral. From the medial cord, medial pectoral. Me mean medial head of the medial nerve. Here, from the lateral cord, lateral head of the medial nerve. You may marry me medial cutaneous nerve for N, medial cutaneous nerve for foreign. You may marry me, Mary. So, hey, are they important? Yes, I mean, it might not be important at this stage and the graduate level, but the more you grow up, the more you will have to know. And then I hope this mnemonic will give you some, some foundation for your future knowledge. So that's the way we have to remember the brachial plexus. So the origin is Robert Taylor drinks cold beer, and this is the way Robert Taylor drinks cold beer, and their relation to the scalene muscle, clavicle, and axillary muscle, and finally they will branch out like that way, and we have to remember the branches from the lateral cord, medial cord, and posterior cord as love me lily, star, and you may marry me, Mary. So yes, at least you will remember from the medial cord, we have the ulnar nerve. From the posterior cord, we have the axillary nerve and radial nerve. From the lateral cord, we have the a portion of the median nerve, and from medial cord, a portion of the median nerve. Combined together, we have the median nerve proper. So yes, a little bit more about brachial plexus. I don't think it is something, I want you to have a look and forget about that. So these are still the branches from the brachial plexus. So just for completeness, and if you have time, have a look so that you know which nerve is coming from the brachial plexus and going to where. So all the latissimus dorsi will be supplied by the thoracodorsal nerve. Look at that. We know that big latissimus dorsi muscle in the back, and this latissimus dorsi is supplied by the thoracodorsal nerve, which is coming from the brachial plexus. The long thoracic nerve, serratus anterior. You remember serratus anterior, the muscle for pushing muscle, serratus anterior, that is the long thoracic nerve. I hope you remember the levator scapulae, rhomboid muscle. These are coming from the dorsal scapular nerve. So they are all originating from the brachial plexus. Yes, look at that course of the axillary nerve and radial nerve. Axillary nerve and radial nerve, where do they come from? From the posterior cord. Posterior cord give STAR, subscapular, T, thoracodorsal, A, axillary, and R for radial nerve. Thoracodorsal, where do they go? It go to the latissimus dorsi. So look at that axillary nerve. It is looping around, winding around the neck of the humerus, going from the front, going to the back here. Look at that axillary nerve. Axillary nerve is short. It just loop around at the neck, surgical neck of the humerus. And if you look at the radial nerve is coming here on the upper part of the humerus. It is on the medial side. it goes from the back of the humerus, loop around the humerus, and then become the lateral structure, and finally runs into the forearm. Look at the relationship of the radial nerve and the axillary nerve. Therefore, if we have damage in the midshaft of the humerus, the radial nerve can get damaged. If you have fracture around or dislocation of the shoulder, they can get the axillary nerve damage. So these are the areas we need to check as a clinician to make sure these nerves are not damaged with these injuries. So, so shoulder joint dislocation can damage the axillary nerve. The midshaft humerus fracture can damage the radial nerve because they are very closely related. So radial nerve is medial structure going from the posterior aspect, become lateral structure, and just gently looping around the back of the humerus. And of course, finally, it will just spread into the forearm and then finally go to the hand. Look at that, the axillary nerve, brachial plexus. Look at that. So these are the C5 to T1, C5, 6, 7, 8, T1. So all the form, and then trunk will become divided into anterior and posterior divisions. Divisions we form we split again, become the cord, anterior and posterior, or the posterior we form the posterior cord. The upper two we form the lateral cord, and medial anterior we continue on its own as the medial cord. So, and then they will go into the extremity. So that relationship, the proximity of the brachial plexus in relation to the shoulder joint, it is just there. Therefore, shoulder dislocation can damage the brachial plexus, and brachial plexus is covering around the axillary artery. Therefore, shoulder dislocation can damage the axillary artery as well. So that is the relationship which we need to appreciate as a clinician. So look at that median nerve. Median nerve origin is 5, 6, 7, 8, T1. Of course, because it is from the upper and the middle and then posterior. So musculocutaneous nerve, look at that. This is a little bit important diagram. Musculocutaneous nerve is for coracobrachialis and bicep brachialis muscle. So our biceps is musculocutaneous nerve. So bicep muscle, if you are using your biceps, when you are doing exercise, using your bicep, I want you to remember the musculocutaneous nerve. Musculocutaneous nerve will give the supply to the bicep and supply to the coracobrachialis. I believe you remember that coracobrachialis muscle, which is originating from the coracoid process. Median nerve, okay, I will give you a quick break soon, just after this slide. So median nerve is origin from the C5 to T1. So the whole brachial plexus contributes. And the ulnar nerve is C8 and T1. So ulnar nerve or root value is C8 and T1. So these are the distribution these nerve give. So yellow here, yellow musculocutaneous nerve, it will come to the lateral surface of the forearm via the musculocutaneous nerve. Look at that. This area of the skin is supplied by the musculocutaneous nerve, which becomes the anterolateral cutaneous nerve of forearm. In the hand, look at that. On the thumb side, radial side, on the thumb side, look at this orangey color. Radial 3, 1, 2, 3.5 finger. Radial 3.5 finger is supplied by the median nerve. and ulnar 1.5 is supplied by the ulnar nerve. And ulnar nerve supply the dorsum. And look at that, the part of the dorsum aspect of the forearm is supplied by the musculocutaneous nerve. So I think this will be a lot easier once you start doing your homework, like so that you can appreciate again. And look at that. This is the axillary nerve and radial nerve. Axillary nerve is on the regimental badge area. So on your badge area here. So if you want to check the sensory function of the axillary nerve, you have to touch here on your shoulder, on the deltoid. And look at the radial nerve. Radial nerve C5 to T1. Look at that. Its sensation in the back of the arm and on the dorsum aspect, on the dorsum aspect of the forearm. And then finally, we go to the dorsum aspect, radial 3 fingers. Look at that, thumb, index, and middle finger. That's the sensation for the radial nerve. So these are the injury. If we have ulnar nerve injury, we will have ulnar claw hand. If we have radial nerve injury, because the job of the radial nerve is to supply the muscle on the extensor aspect of the forearm. So if we damage the radial nerve, we cannot do this. Our wrist will drop like that. That is what we call wrist drop. And median nerve injury here like that. Okay. So before I go to lumbar plexus, I want to, I want you to clear your mind. So we'll take about 10 minutes break. So let's say it is 11:07. So if we take a break about, that is what we call lumbar plexus, the anterior rami from the lumbar 1, lumbar 2, lumbar 3, lumbar 4, we march together and finally split again. And these nerves come out from the lumbar plexus. Where are they? Lumbar plexus are in the psoas major muscle. So psoas major muscle, I believe you remember psoas major muscle, which is originating from the tip of the transverse processes of the lumbar 1 to 5. So we have these lumbar plexus together with the psoas muscle. The main branches from the lumbar plexus is femoral nerve and obturator nerve. Of course, you will remember the femoral nerve. It is a little bit of effort to remember the obturator nerve. You remember the obturator foramen in the pelvis. So through the obturator foramen, the obturator nerve will come out. So femoral nerve, obturator nerve will originate from the lumbar plexus, which is the origin from the lumbar 1 to 4. Look at that. See, you can see now lumbar 1, lumbar 2, lumbar 3, lumbar 4, lumbar 5 vertebrae, or lumbar 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, they will arise and then they will march together to form the lumbar plexus. And finally, the important nerves are femoral nerve. Look at that, big femoral nerve, and the obturator nerve here. And lumbar plexus, as you know, anterior or ventral primary rami, originated from the muscles, psoas muscle, and then femoral nerve and obturator nerve. So I want you to remember lumbar plexus will give us femoral nerve. Lumbar plexus will give us obturator nerve. Where are they? They are located in the psoas muscle. Where is the origin? From lumbar 1 to 4, anterior or ventral primary rami. Look at that. This is the lumbar plexus. What is the major branches, major nerve coming out from the lumbar plexus? The femoral nerve and the obturator nerve. Look at that. This is what we call the obturator foramen, which is the superior pubic rami, inferior pubic rami, and this is a window which is called the obturator foramen. Obturator nerve come through the obturator foramen into the thigh. Femoral nerve here, you can see the femoral nerve here, where is it? It is very much closely related to the femoral artery, femoral vein. Look at that. Oh, which is the most lateral structure? It is the femoral nerve. So, you know, if we press ourselves into our groin, so with your finger, you press 3 fingers into your groin and try to palpate the femoral artery pulsation. So just underneath the inguinal ligament region, this is the inguinal ligament, this is the inguinal ligament. So I want you to, with your 3 fingers in your groin, and then push your 3 fingers into the groin, and I want you to feel the femoral artery pulsation. So it is very easy to get the femoral artery pulsation in the groin, because this is the major arterial pulsation. So if someone is like shocked, and if you found somebody in the floor and you want to check their pulsation, the main pulse are the carotid pulsation and the femoral pulsation. These are the central pulse. So if you can feel your own femoral pulsation, then on the lateral side of the pulse you are feeling, we have the femoral nerve. Look at that. So the way we try to remember is NAVY, navy. So navy, N for the femoral nerve, which is the most lateral. A is for the artery, femoral artery in the middle, and V for the vein, femoral vein, which is most medial. NAVY in the Y front here. So NAVY. So that's the way we try to remember the relationship of the artery, vein, and the nerves in the femoral region. So that is the femoral nerve, which is originating from the lumbar plexus, which is the lumbar, usually lumbar 1 to 4. Sometimes lumbar 5 might contribute, but usually lumbar 1 to 4. Yeah, okay. They are closely related, or they are lying on top of the psoas muscle. So this is the lumbar plexus. The femoral nerve come out, and obturator nerve come out through the obturator foramen. Look at the femoral nerve here, which is pretty big in the upper anterior part of the thigh. And look at that, finally it divides into multiple branches. And then one nerve fibers just keep running here, which becomes the long saphenous nerve, which is very long, and therefore we call it saphenous nerve, or the long saphenous nerve here on the medial aspect of our lower limb. And the femoral nerve, look at the femoral nerve, color with green. So on the skin sensation, these are the area femoral nerve supply, and finally become saphenous nerve, which is the continuation of the femoral nerve. Look at that. So on the medial aspect of your leg, that sensation comes from the femoral nerve. Obturator nerve, look at that, just above the knee on the medial aspect, little patch here. That is the sensation for the obturator nerve region. And the sciatic nerve. Sciatic nerve originates from the lumbar 4-5, sacral 1-2-3. So look at that. Sciatic nerve originate from the lumbar 4-5, sacral 1-2-3, and we have the tibial nerve portion and common peroneal nerve portion. Combination of tibia and common peroneal portion is called sciatic nerve. But finally, they will divide into the tibial nerve and the common peroneal nerve, common fibular nerve, and these are the structures which we give. So we will just talk about this sciatic nerve a little bit more detail in later. But at the moment, from the sacrum, we will have this. tibial nerve and common peroneal nerve. Initially, combination of this is called the sciatic nerve. Hey, Hilton's law. So when you are studying the peripheral nerves and the cutaneous skin sensation, I want you to remember this chant. Hilton's law. He is an English surgeon. What did he say? What did he say about nerves? So he said, any nerve that's innervate a muscle and producing the movement of a joint. So for example, like our bicep muscle gives the movement of the elbow joint, because flexion of the bicep, we flex the elbow. So any nerve that innervates the muscle, producing the movement of the joint. So bicep, elbow joint movement, and bicep is supplied by the musculocutaneous nerve. So this musculocutaneous nerve will also supply the joint itself. So musculocutaneous nerve will give sensory sensation for the elbow as well, together with the skin covering over the elbow. So that is the Hilton's law. So there are many nerves, for example, like the femoral nerve. Femoral nerve will give supply to the quadriceps femoris muscle. So quadriceps femoris muscle will move the joint. So which means the femoral nerve will give sensation to the knee joint as well as the skin over the knee joint. So that is what he say about the peripheral nerves, which are crossing over the joints and supplying the muscle which is acting on the joint. So this is Hilton's law, which is interesting. And I want you to remember him, Hilton's, which is an English surgeon, and this is what he said. So when you are thinking about the peripheral nerves, I want you to think about the Hilton's law as well. It is really interesting. And now this is the lumbar plexus we were talking about. Lumbar 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. With or without 5, they will form the lumbar plexus, and the two important nerves are femoral nerve and obturator nerve. So finally, we got to the sacral plexus. Sacral plexus will come from the lumbar 4 to sacral 4. It will supply the buttock, lower limb, and pelvis. The most important nerve is sciatic nerve, which we saw. So lumbar 4 to sacral 4, we go to the buttock, lower limb, and pelvis. And the most important nerve is, peripheral nerve is sciatic nerve, which is the combination of tibia and common peroneal nerve. Look at that sacral plexus. It is lumbar 4, lumbar 5, sacral 1, sacral 2, all the nerve roots come out. Nerve roots come out from the sacral foramen. Look at that, sacral 3, sacral 4, might be sacral 5 or coccygeus. They might contribute as well, but mainly lumbar 4 to sacral 4. Look at that, all the anterior rami only. This posterior rami will go to the back of the skin, muscle of the back, not the only the anterior portion will form the sacral plexus. Yeah. So all these sacral plexus, and finally the most important nerve is sciatic nerve. Of course, there are many other nerves like pudendal nerve, inferior gluteus, superior gluteus. These are the muscles these are the gluteus maximus and minimus muscle. You have seen this already. But one important nerve coming from the sacral plexus is sciatic nerve. Sciatic nerve is the main nerve for the lower limb, which runs on the posterior aspect of the hip, of the thigh, and then come down, and at the back of the knee, it's split into the tibia and common peroneal nerve. Look at that, the dissection of the cadaveric dissection of the posterior aspect of the hip, and you can see the sciatic nerve. Look at that sciatic nerve coming out from the sacral plexus, running in the posterior aspect of the thigh, and finally split into common peroneal nerve and tibial nerve. Dermatomes. What is a dermatome? So dermatome is the area of skin which is supplied or innervated by the cutaneous branch from the single spinal nerve. So we have 8 spinal nerves. So, and that's one of the spinal nerve, just only particular portion of the skin supplied by that particular nerve root is called the dermatome. So only one spinal nerve we innervate that skin patch. And it is everything except cervical 1. So no cervical 1 dermatome. And on the trunk on our body, thorax and abdomen, it is 50% overlap, which means this area of the skin will be supplied by the thoracic 10 and will be supplied by the thoracic 11. So there will be overlap on the chest and abdomen. Therefore, the sensation on the thorax is a little bit vague. The sensation in our fingers and limbs, it is very sharp and well demarcated. So that is what we call dermatomes. Dermatome is the area of skin innervated by the cutaneous branch from the one and only spinal nerve. Cervical 1 does not give any dermatome, and on the trunk, they will be 50% overlap. So look at that. There is no C1. It starts with cervical 2, cervical 3, cervical 4, cervical 5. So the good way to remember is cervical 5, at the tip of your shoulder, it is cervical 5. So it is only the cervical 5 at the tip of your shoulder. So if you can feel the sensation on the skin on the tip of the shoulder, at least we can say that your 5 cervical nerve root is intact. So the C6 is for our thumb. C7 is for our middle finger. C8 is for our pinky. So that's the way, this is the way. Cervical 6, cervical 7, cervical 8. On the medial aspect, it is thoracic 1 here. Thoracic 1, where is the thoracic 1 here? And here, nipple line is usually thoracic 4. Yeah, so nipple line is usually thoracic 4. Umbilicus is thoracic 10, and xiphisternum is thoracic 8. So, just like we have to jump. In the nipple line region, usually thoracic 4. At the xiphisternum, thoracic 8. Umbilicus region, thoracic 10, and suprapubic region, thoracic 12. And in the groin, that will be lumbar 1. In front of the knee, lumbar 2. Medial to the knee, lumbar 3. Medial malleolus, lumbar 4. Big toe, lumbar 5. Little toe on the lateral aspect is S1. So these are the dermatomes. So this area of skin is only supplied by the 1 lumbar 5 nerve root. So these dermatomes are important gradually when you go into the clinical environment. So tip of the shoulder is cervical 5. Your thumb is cervical 6. Your middle finger is cervical 7. Your little finger is cervical 8. This area is thoracic 1, and upper arm medial side is thoracic 2. The nipple line is thoracic 4. Xiphisternum is thoracic 8. Umbilicus is thoracic 10, and just above the pubis is thoracic 12. And if you are sitting here, your perianal region is sacral 4, gradually expand, sacral 1, 2, 3, 4. So you are sitting on the sacral 1, sacral 2, sacral 3, and the sensation of the perineum comes from the sacral 4, sacral 5. Your big toe is lumbar 5, median malleolus is lumbar 4, medial aspect of the knee is lumbar 3. In your groin, it is lumbar 1. Little toe is sacrum 1. So these are the important, these are the important, what shall I say, dermatomal landmarks. Because if we are seeing a patient with the spinal cord injury, we have to check which level this patient's spinal cord was damaged. For us to know which level, we need to check the motor and sensory level of the each and every spinal nerve. And this plays a role in the checking the which level is damaged. Let's say if somebody can feel on the shoulder but cannot feel at the neck, then you know that cervical 5 is still intact, but cervical 4, cervical 3, cervical 2 was damaged already. Hey, what do you worry about? So the sensation for the cervical 5 is still intact, but cervical 4, cervical 3, cervical 2 is damaged. What does it mean? That means the C4 and C3 nerve root was damaged. At least you can check with your sensation. Then you have to check the motor portion of the cervical 3, cervical 4. Why do they important? Because cervical 3, 4, 5 is important for the diaphragm, respiration. So if you are seeing a patient with cervical 5 injury, a cervical 5 intact, cervical 4 injury, then you will be worried about the respiration of this patient, because C3, 4, 5 will keep our diaphragm alive. If C3, 4, 5 is not intact, our diaphragm will be damaged as well. And as we know, cervical nerve root will carry both motor and sensory. It is easy to check the sensory. Just touch it. Can you feel me touch? And you know that this nerve root is intact or not. Of course, you want to make sure the motor is intact as well. But so at the same time, like those people with spinal cord compression in the lumbar region, then they will damage the sacrum 1, 2, 3, 4. So these patients, we got like urine and bladder retention, bowel incontinence because of this cervical sacral 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 got damaged. That is what we call cauda equina syndrome. Right, so look at this patient, look at that. This is the nipple, this is the axilla, this is the posterior aspect of the back, and this is the anterior aspect of the belly. So if you look at this is the shingle, yeah? So herpes zoster. Herpes zoster, it is running along just very particular and peculiar in this one direction here. So this is the shingle. Which nerve root is involved in this shingle? Because shingle means the herpes zoster virus will sit in the nerve root region and track along the nerve. So if you see that, which nerve root is going to get involved? This is the nipple. So nipple is thoracic 4. So this area might be thoracic 4 or thoracic 5. Along the intercostal nerve might be thoracic 4, thoracic 5. This herpes come along here. Look at that. It is just going along the nerve root. It is not going anywhere, everywhere like that. It is just running along the nerve root of the thoracic, nipple, as I say, thoracic 4. So might be thoracic 4 or thoracic 5, or might be thoracic along that line. Look at that. That is very peculiar. So that is the shingle, which is following the thoracic spinal nerve root, which is the intercostal nerve. So yes, the rest is the same diagram from the central nervous system. So I'm not going to repeat that. All these come from the central nervous system. I want to keep it as a combination of peripheral and spinal nervous system, central and peripheral nervous system. So this dermatomes are important. Let's say if you want to, if the patient if the patient is incontinent of feces, if the patient is incontinent of urine, or if the patient is like urinary retention, cannot wee, then if you worry about the spinal cord injury, you have to check the sacral buttock region, sacral 1, 2, 3, 4. So you need to do the digital rectal examination. Put your finger into the patient's back passage and check whether they can feel it. Everyone should be able to feel it. And if they cannot feel, then we will be worried about sacral 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If we worry about sacral 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we will be worried about sciatic nerve, because sciatic nerve is the lumbar 4, lumbar 5, lumbar 6, lumbar 7, lumbar 1, lumbar 4, lumbar 5, sacral 1, 2, 3. So that is the motor portion for the sacral nerve, and sensory portion for the sacral nerve is around the buttock region and little toe region. So we have to check and tally and make a prediction that which level of the spinal cord was damaged. So yes, here comes the end of the peripheral nervous system. If I have to just, summarize everything, then peripheral nervous system start from the little receptors in the tip of our skin, and this sensation will be any stimuli from external environment will be taken, picked up by the little receptors in the skin. These receptors will take along the sensory portion of the peripheral nerve, will go to the central nervous system. It might be just at the spinal cord level, or it might go to the brain level, and then it might come back down with the motor. Depending on the motor, whether we like it or not, we will respond the stimuli appropriately. So that's why we were talking about the receptors in the skin. We were talking about the peripheral nerve, which conveys the receptor stimulus to the spinal cord. And when trying to do so, we have to talk about the ventral rami and dorsal rami. Of course, ventral rami, we form the nerve plexuses, which is what we call the cervical plexus, brachial plexus, lumbar plexus, and sacral plexuses. And dorsal rami do not involve in the nerve plexuses. They will go to the back of the body and supply the skin and muscles of the back. That is in short. And remember the dermatomes. Dermatomes, this area of the skin is particularly supplied by this nerve root. This area of the skin is particularly supplied by this nerve root, and so on and on and on. So there is no overlap for the dermatome. Dermatome is the area of the skin innervated by the cutaneous branch from the single spinal nerve. All right, has anyone got any question? Okay, I hope I haven't put you to sleep yet. Okay, right, I will post the homeworks later. And on Monday, I just wonder whether you want to go to autonomic nervous system or you just want to revise the both central and peripheral nervous system. What do you think?
Revise that, maybe?
Revise it, yeah, I think that might be better. So we will revise on Monday, like central nervous, so that, like before you forget, when you are stage of confusion, then we can all revise and try to understand again. And then next week, Wednesday, we will continue with autonomic nervous system. I think next week, Friday, we will continue with autonomic nervous system. And I think that might be it for the anatomy. Of course, there will be one lecture, small lecture for the special senses, which is just for your information, so that you got like basic knowledge about special senses. And just tell all your friends, if you know who are a little bit behind the class, just try to finish this anatomy in this fall semester, because from spring semester, I believe you all know that the labs will come back in person, which means like you will have to walk a lot more. So anatomy, just try to finish, because you are enrolled, just try to finish your anatomy this fall semester. Right. Anything else?